Hello everyone, AmyR here with Prairie Paper and Ink. Welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. So for today's card, I am using the My Favorite Things Cute Chemists stamp set by Bertie Brown that I absolutely love. I've been collecting all the Bertie Brown sets since the beginning, since they started, because they're just adorable and I love the characters. So I've lined them all up in my travel stamp platform here on Neenah Classic Crest 80-pound solar white cardstock. And then I'm going to stamp all these images with My Favorite Things Extreme Black ink. And I'm going to stamp them a couple times because it's a brand new set. So new stamps usually need a few stampings, rub my hands against them, all that kind of stuff, because when stamps are brand new, they kind of tend to repel ink a little bit. Like, you know, you just don't get the perfect image right from the beginning. That's another reason why I love, stamp platforms, my Misty, etc. Because I've saved so much paper with these. I can't, number one must-have tool is a stamp positioner. So I stamped all the images, and there's a little pair of glasses in the set that I just think is the cutest thing. So of course I had to line it up and stamp it on both of these. So both these little characters are wearing glasses. I just think it's so cute. So once everything's stamped, I'm going to go in and color with my Copic markers. And I did list all of the colors on the screen as I'm using them. So my go-to always is to start with the skin. That's just force of habit over all these years is I start with the skin, then I do the hair, and then I just go on to whatever else needs to be colored. So this is my go-to kind of light skin combo. And again, I always generally go darkest to lightest because it's faster. But if you're newer with Copics or you're struggling with them or anything like that, usually the rule of thumb is you start with your start with your lightest and then just build up to the darkest, because obviously the idea being if you apply your darkest, you can't really take away much of that, whereas it's easier to build up. So I go backwards out of laziness. That's all it is just pure laziness. It's just faster and quicker for me. But when I want more control and I really want to put the effort in, I will go lightest to darkest and, kind of go back and forth and, build up that blend, build up that color like you're supposed to. So whatever works. But for me, I've been enjoying this whole darkest to lightest thing. And then the other thing too is if you struggle is use a heavier weight cardstock. Instead of the Neenah 80-pound, use the 110. I remember when way back in the day, having the options of the 80 and the 110. And I remember I struggled so much with the 80-pound cardstock. I always found the color was bleeding out past the lines. I was just not getting the results I wanted. I couldn't, it just wasn't working. And when I went to the heavier weight cardstock, because there's more, it's thicker, so it absorbs more ink. It kind of gave me that extra leeway I needed to get things looking the way I wanted them to. But then the more practice I got, the more comfortable I got with Copic markers, I switched to the lighter weight because I found I could go quicker and I didn't need it absorbing that much ink. So I hope that makes sense. So I did the skin, I did the hair, and then I actually went over the area where their glasses are with my colorless blender, because that kind of presses that color deeper into the cardstock and lightens it a bit. And I wanted that to kind of emphasize their glasses so that everything wasn't, the exact same tone and same shade. So I did that, and then I start going on to color everything else. And I'm keeping the color combo with all these fairly simple. I was thinking obviously they're wearing lab coats, so those will be white. And then I was like, well, I'll just do their pants the same color. And then everything else is in the similar color combo. And for whatever reason, in my head, I was just thinking I was in a pastel mood. So I did gray, cool grays for their pants. And then I used the very lightest of the cool grays to do their lab coats, just to give it that little bit of definition. And then once I've got those done, I'm going to start bringing in some color. So this set technically Valentine themed, but it's not specific Valentine. I like the sentiments in it because some of them are a little bit risque. and they just made me giggle. So that's another thing I like about the Birdie Brown sets, is a lot of the sentiments are just fun, and they're all the same fonts. So you can kind of mix and match a lot of the sentiments between all the different sets, you know? So I only stuck with this one set and the sentiments with it because obviously it's all chemistry themed and whatnot, and just nerdy and all that fun stuff. So I used one of my favorite pink combos and used that not only for his shirt, but then like for the hearts and for some of the little, like, I guess I'll call them potions. They're not actually potions, but in my head, I'm kind of starting to think of like Harry Potter and all that kind of stuff. You know, love potions. So colored with that. And then I was bringing in my colorless blender over and over again I would just color over the little like bubbles in all these little potion bottles. I just colored over it rather than like work around them and, you know, again, take more time and fiddle. I just colored right over them because then I could just press the colorless blender to those areas and lighten them up. So I just went and did everything, you know, all the pink areas like I generally do. So I did all the pink areas with the pink markers, and now I'm going to do all the purple, like all the things I decided to color purple with the purple markers. And again, these are kind of my go-to combos. I get asked this a lot. I did a video forever, years and years and years, like a lifetime ago, on some of my favorite Copic markers, etc. And people have asked like, why haven't I done an updated one? I'm not the person to ask for color recommendations. Like, you know, I only want 10. What do you recommend? I'm the worst. I have them all because that's just, I like having all the colors. I like having the options. But I cannot recommend enough. If you are not a fan or like haven't gone onto Sandy Alnock's website, go there. She has resources, so many resources, not just the videos, but she's got charts. She has the amazing, you know, hex chart for Copic markers, which again, I highly recommend. Even if you're not planning on getting all of them, it makes you think of them in a different way and grouping them in a different way. And then she's also just got tons of resources, like so many charts and color combos and ideas and all those things. So I recommend, if you want more advice when it comes to Copic coloring or where to start or anything like that, go to Sandy Alnock. She is like the go-to for that. I get so many ideas from her and like color combos and all that kind of stuff. So anywho, after I was done all of my coloring, I took my white gel pen and went in and added highlights and went a little fast. There's a couple spots where I'm like, oh, I wish I could redo those, but once they're down, you're kind of stuck with them. But added little highlights and whatnot to like the hair and the faces and everything. I purposely left the glasses areas. I did not add any white gel highlights to them because I had plans. And then I used the coordinating Die-Namics dies, taped them into place with washi tape, die cut all of these. And then I took my crystal glaze from Nouveau and I'm adding that to the glasses area. And that's why I did not add the white gel pen highlights to that, because crystal glaze or glossy accents, anything like that, will dissolve any white gel pen you add because it's like water reactive basically. So I've learned that lesson the hard way over the years. So if I plan on using any sort of glossy effect type of a gel, I will not add white gel pen to those areas. So I filled those in and then I set all those die cuts aside to let that really, really dry. And then for my card front, I pulled out some Distress watercolor paper. This is the 4 1/4 by 5 1/2, you know, pre-cut piece. And I have the texture side facing up because I wanted that texture to show. And then I have 3 different colors of Distress inks in pale pastel colors because I wanted it to go with the images. And then I'm just blending them on with my Picket Fence blending brushes. I've said this before, you don't need all of the sizes and you don't need multiples of the brushes really. This like kind of medium size I have multiples of because I like having extras. Again, don't have to do everything I do, don't have to have everything I have. I just like it because it's convenient. But you can easily wipe these brushes off in between on the microfiber cloth. And like I've shown that in other videos, done all my blending with multiple colors with one brush. So I just like having more than one. It's a convenience thing. So I blended the 3 colors on and then I sprayed it with my Distress sprayer to get that great splatter and let this sit for like 30 to 45 seconds. Pressed a paper towel to it, lifted it up, and that's like always the magic moment when you see that splatter, like how reactive these inks are. So I sped up the drying process because I wanted the paper to be dry because I wanted to add some splatter. And my first initial thought was I was just going to smush the ink pad onto an acrylic block, add a bit of water, do a splatter. But I wanted these splatters to show up more, and these are three very pale colors. So to actually make the splatter easier to show up and less work on my part, I pulled out my Distress ink refills. So I'm using the Spun Sugar, the Tumbled Glass, and the wilted or shaded lilac refills. And I'm not even squeezing the dropper there. I'm just touching it to the acrylic block just to get one little drop of that ink. And then with a wet paintbrush, I just pick up that ink and I'm just tapping it onto the background. So I've got all this like splatter and texture and all that going on. And then once I have all that color splattered on there, same thing. I'm going to set this aside and let it dry because these are the ink refills. They take a little bit longer to dry than they would have if I'd mixed a lot more water with them. So set that aside so I don't touch it and smear it. Let that completely dry, and then quickly clean off my brushes. I get asked this a lot too. I just use my microfiber cloth. I don't use water. I don't use soap. I have yet to even need that. I find I can just rub them on a microfiber cloth, and then just to make sure that the ink's removed, I rub it on a piece of scrap of white cardstock like I showed, and if no ink shows up, it's good to go. I can go on to the next ink, the next color, whatever. So set those aside as well. And then for my sentiments, I am going to white heat emboss these onto some black cardstock. So I'm going to stamp both the sentiments I want to use on the outside and inside of my card with some clear embossing ink. Going to coat these with some detail white embossing powder, melt them with my heat tool. Once these are smooth and melted, I'm going to die cut them with different dies from the Simon Says Stamp Sentiment Labels wafer dies. So I'm going to tape those dies into place with washi tape as well, run those through my machine, and then they're die cut. And by this point, the background that I'd sponged and splattered was dry. So I die cut that with one of the My Favorite Things A2 stitched rectangle stacks wafer dies. And then my card base, I ended up deciding to do black cardstock. I was going to do white because that's what I do 99% of the time. But decided to do black cardstock as my base this time. And since I did black cardstock, and there you can see I die cut my background, so it's got the little stitched edge and it's smaller than my card. So since you can see a bit of the card base, I pulled out the ITSY BITSY polka dots background, and I'm inking this up with Tumbled Glass Distress Oxide ink. That is one of the reasons why I personally have both the oxide and the regular distress inks. They are completely different inks, completely different looks. The basic one being that oxide inks, because they have a pigment in them, they show up on dark cardstock. Because if I'd inked this up with the Tumbled Glass regular distress ink, you wouldn't see it at all, especially on black cardstock. But because the oxide inks have that pigment, they show up, which is really fun. So I inked up the outer kind of perimeter of that background stamp because the inner part isn't going to show in the end anyway. And then pressed my card base onto it, got that impression. And then to adhere my little characters and the sentiment, I'm just using foam tape to adhere to that background panel that I had made. And then I'm going to adhere that panel directly to the card base with some Studio Caudia liquid adhesive. I'm just going to put that on and then line that up onto my card base, adhere that into place. And then for the inside of the card, I die cut just a piece of white cardstock with that same A2 stitched rectangle stacks die. And then I'm just going to adhere that second sentiment with the liquid adhesive this time. I'm not going to use any foam tape or anything because it's the inside of the card, so I want everything like flat so that the card closes completely. And then all of those little like beakers and whatnot, I'm going to adhere onto the inside of the card. So I just kind of adhered all those little elements, and then the remaining two I'm going to adhere to the card front, kind of tuck them behind my little characters here. And then I'm going to adhere that inner panel to the inside of the card because that gives me somewhere I can write, to my recipient, etc. But I could also just leave the inside. I could have left it black and then adhered everything and the sentiment and whatnot. And then I would just use a gel pen. But depending on my mood, sometimes I'll add, just a lighter piece of cardstock or white cardstock to the inside, or I'll leave it just the dark card base, and then I'll just write with a gel pen so that it shows up. So as a final bit of embellishment, I couldn't resist adding a little bit of kind of bling. The hearts are blingy. These are the Studio Caudia iridescent hearts crystals that I love. So those were kind of fitting with just the theme of this and the beakers and the bubbles and everything. And then I also am adhering some little Studio Caudia clear drops. So I kind of, you know, sprinkled those rather liberally onto my card front here, and I'm just going to adhere those into place with that same Studio Caudia glue. Just picking up the crystals and the little bubbles with my jewel picker, putting down a little drop of the adhesive, and then pressing those into place. And once I get all of these adhered, that is going to finish off my card. So as always, I will have a link below the video to my blog post. I'll have a supply list with links to everything I use, so you can check that out if you're interested. Thank you all so much for watching, for subscribing, thumbs upping, commenting. I really appreciate it. And I will see you all very soon in the next video. Bye.